Hello folks, this is Jack, and in this video I just want to share some of my thoughts with you regarding the AP story that talks about the study that apparently shows a correlation between the more conservative areas of, I believe, Oregon and the increase of attempted gay teen suicide rates versus the less conservative areas of Oregon. And the fact is, okay, my impression of the article is it misses the point entirely. Instead of it being an issue of how do we help gay teens out and how do we help teens, period, out with dealing with suicide, it attempts to put the blame somewhere where I don't believe the blame actually belongs. And that's on Republicans, Democrats, make it a political issue. I think that's ridiculous and not very beneficial at all. We of course can disagree with that. I don't think we disagree, though, with the fact that there's a very real problem. The problem is that for whatever reason, and we can talk about what those reasons, possible reasons are, is teenagers, specifically gay teenagers, are feeling as though suicide is a viable recourse to dealing with bullying, intimidation, ostracism that is going on in the school. What are some things that we can put in place as a society to help decrease these things? First of all, I don't think it's limited. It's not limited to homosexual teenagers. Teenagers in general who do not fit in with the crowd are most likely going to encounter some sort of bullying, some sort of intimidation, some sort of sense of feeling of ostracism. So I think instead of making this hey, this is a gay problem, we need to make this as this is a teen problem that all teens can potentially face at some point in their life, and that is this feeling of acceptance, the feeling of not fitting in with the crowd, and as such, being more inclined towards intimidation or being bullied because it's more acceptable because they are not part of that main community or pocket of group at whatever school, So I think anti-bullying laws and those sorts of things, rules in schools are beneficial in that way. They're a help, albeit they're not a solution in and of themselves, because there's a lot of different issues to look at, a lot of different components to look at. The next component to look at, I think, is, first of all, we can't force students. Once we take care of the whole bullying thing and the intimidation and the harassment thing, you can have a public school, you can have a community, a society in which students treat each other in a very courteous, respectful way, but nonetheless, students still feel ostracized. And this can happen to any student who defines themselves in a particular way that stands in contrast to the majority of the students or the majority of the community of which they happen to live in. How do they deal with this? This brings us to the next point of suicide and the importance of essentially indoctrinating students, children, with the belief that suicide is not a viable option. It should not be something they consider or think as being a response to the ostracism that some of them will end up encountering, either in the school or in life in general, or when they move to a particular location where they don't fit in, where they feel ostracized by the community. This is, of course, assuming that, the whole intimidation, harassment, bullying, unacceptable, shouldn't happen to anyone, period, regardless, okay? That needs to be addressed. But the next part, is, I think in the AP article, there was a student that brought this up, and I think this is a very good point. I think it's a very foundational point that often gets neglected, is even if all those issues are taken care of, the fact is gay teens are going to most likely face a certain degree of ostracism. That is, they're not part of the main, teenage crowd, because the majority of the teenagers are not homosexual, they're heterosexual, and of course, they've defined themselves, by certain behaviors and patterns and all these sorts of things that teenagers do. Teenagers, we all know what teenagers are very fickle. They and how they're influenced, all these sorts of things. I despise my high school years. All right. And the fact is, of course, even as adults, the way we judge people and how we accept them and our criteria and standards, we exclude a whole bunch of people. We learn to deal with not being part of that crowd, right? And when we left high school, I think a lot of us realized, all right, there's the internet, there's a whole world out there, so it's okay if these people at school don't accept me, or these people at my job, or this community and the city that I live in. The internet sort of opened up this opportunity now for a lot of people to be connected that locally sometimes can't be. But teenagers have a lot of emotional stuff going on. Their hormones and going through puberty and all these things, I think, sort of adds to this, perhaps the sense that they have of, I can't deal with it sort of feeling, which I think that's where the dealing with suicide is extremely important as a society, as a culture. And to be honest, I get the feeling as though we send a mixed message about suicide. Sometimes I feel as though, and sure, as adults, we can perhaps, we like to tease things out and make distinctions. But if teens get the sense of, hey, if you're in a lot of pain, if you're suffering, if you're terminal, then suicide is an option for you. Then I can see how a teenager might begin to sense that, that's a possibility for them. I think that public schools, I think that we get into some sketchy areas here, because I don't know if it's the place of the education, the public schools, to be teaching the sort of values. I mean, I guess in some sense it is, but the value of human life, the intrinsic worth of human life. I mean, this is obviously a very philosophical thing, but I think this, when we live in a society where people, this is not very talked about very often. There isn't a sense in which you can ground that, maybe perhaps because we disagree. Some of us disagree about what really grounds this, the meaning of life, what it means to be human. Well, I think that can present some challenges in terms of, how people will deal with the feeling and sense of being ostracized from community at large. Especially teenagers. And so I think instilling within teenagers this foundational message of there is intrinsic value and worth to their life, even if they encounter ostracism, even though they're not accepted by the crowd, the teenage crowd, that their life still has a sense of significance and value and worth, and trying to help them see what that is in a way that really goes beyond the limitations of the labels by which they define themselves, that go beyond the labels by which so many of us will define ourselves. So in that way, their ostracism that they encounter at school perhaps gets minimized and replaced for a sense of a greater joy to be found in knowing that there is a general overarching sense of being human. But even then, I mean, of course, the struggle is being a teenager. Can they fully grasp that concept? Is it going to be fully? You can't. You need community. We can't. This is the struggle here. We function in community. So what happens when you see those popular kids? You want to be the popular kid, and you're not the popular kid. We struggle with this on YouTube. You want to be the most popular. You want to be accepted. You want to be liked, and you're not that. And you strive for it, and you fight for it. But what happens when you're a teenager? It's just magnified. What happens, of course, when you go home and you're dealing with the fact that your parents don't accept you? And this is not limited to homosexuals. I know when I was a youth pastor, I knew teenagers that were Christian and their parents weren't. Teenagers that would go to school and they would downplay their religious identity for the sake of being accepted by the larger teenage population. They did not want to allow for their religious identity as a Christian to become a stigmatizing factor. And so they were willing to downplay it, not really talk about it very much, perhaps not even at all, in order that they may feel accepted and be a part of that larger, social construct, that teenage, So I'm not saying that people Some teenagers downplay that, but what happens when, as a society, we say, no, you need to define yourself by that. You need to keep that label. That's who you are. And it has to do with something like sexuality. Well, and especially when we say, don't downplay that. Now, don't get me wrong. We all, whether you agree or disagree, people in society will tell teenagers to not downplay certain things that we as a society will say are very valuable. But if we're going to say something is very valuable and that they should not downplay it for the purposes of finding acceptance by the social construct or the population at school, well then, as a society, we need to figure out how do we deal with the fact that some teens are going to be ostracized and they may go home and they may be getting these messages from the media, they may be getting these messages from people on YouTube, but they're not getting the sense of community from their family. They're not getting the sense of community from the teenagers at school. So now what? This goes back to the sense of suicide and really indoctrinating within them that suicide is not a viable option. And then helping perhaps to use the internet as a means of maybe bringing people together. But to be honest, it's not the solution, but I think it could be part of a solution. There's a lot I talked about. This video is really long. I'm interested in a conversation. I know some people might take this video the wrong way, and I'm here to hear your perspective and discuss about it, to see your side. I know I disagree with people. We disagree. That's okay. At the heart of it, we all, I believe, agree that there's a problem that needs to be addressed. And teenagers, gay teenagers, teenagers that are feeling ostracized, that are being bullied, they shouldn't be bullied. I'm not going to say they shouldn't be ostracized, because the fact is, that's just a part of life. You're going to feel ostracized. You shouldn't, but being ostracized, learning how to cope and deal with being ostracized, and understanding that suicide is not an option for it. That should not be an option that enters your mind. And the reason why I say I shouldn't say, I can't say that you shouldn't be ostracized, because how do you begin to force people to be friends with someone? You can't. But you can create dialogue and discussion, which I believe can pave the paths for a degree of friendship, a certain type of friendship, which may make waves within the teenage, cliques and social construct. I don't know. That's crazy area. All right. Peace out, folks.